There is a moment, lasting no more than 3 seconds, where a single touch can send enough oxytocin flooding through a woman's brain to keep her feeling emotionally connected to someone for hours afterward. That is not a romantic notion. That is biology. And yet, the vast majority of men have never once stopped to consider which specific touches produce that response and which ones silently convince a woman she has no interest in seeing them again. What follows are exactly 7 touches that shift everything, and the 5th one borders on unfair. Here is something rarely spoken out loud but deeply true. A woman who has lived enough life does not fall for words anymore. Every flattering compliment has already reached her ears. Every sweet message has already lit up her phone screen. She has sat across from men at beautifully set tables while they searched for the perfectly crafted thing to say. Language lost its power over her a long time ago. What genuinely reaches her, what actually finds its way past the carefully constructed walls she has spent years building, is something far older and far more instinctive. It is touch, but not careless touch. Not the clumsy, grasping, I saw this work in a film kind of contact. The touches that matter are deliberate, specific, and psychologically loaded in ways that words are simply not capable of replicating. They communicate safety. They communicate confidence. They communicate tenderness and desire simultaneously, and they do all of it without a single syllable. A psychologist at UC Berkeley named Dasher Keltner once ran a study where complete strangers were asked to convey distinct emotions to one another using only a brief touch on the forearm. No speaking, no facial expressions, just contact. The findings were remarkable. Participants could correctly identify emotions like love, gratitude, and sympathy through touch alone with accuracy rates reaching as high as 78%. That level of precision is something spoken language rarely achieves. So if you have ever found yourself wondering why certain men seem to create instant emotional connection with women while others try everything and still end up in the friendship category, this is the answer sitting right in front of you. It is not about what they say. It is about how they touch. And a woman with real-life experience behind her responds to this on an entirely different level than someone younger who has not yet learned to read the difference between genuine presence and performance. Before walking through all 7 of these touches, one thing needs to be said directly. 2 of them will seem almost too simple. The temptation will be to dismiss them as obvious. That would be a mistake. Those 2 are the ones that women with real experience have specifically described as making them feel things they could not put into words. And the final touch on this list carries a psychological impact so significant that relationship therapists actually prescribe it to couples who are on the edge of falling apart entirely. That context will make more sense when we arrive there. The first touch is what can best be described as the slow lower back guide. Before writing this off as generic chivalry, consider what is actually happening beneath the surface. When a hand is placed gently at the small of a woman's back, while moving through a doorway, navigating a crowd, or standing beside her at an event, it makes contact with one of the most nerve-dense regions of the entire human body. The lower back holds a dense concentration of nerve endings wired directly into the brain's emotional processing centers. A slow, warm, confident placement of the hand in that spot sends a signal that never stops to check in with logic. It bypasses reasoning entirely. But speed and pressure are not minor details here. They are everything. A quick tap reads as something a relative might do at a holiday gathering. A heavy pressing hand reads as dominance, but a full warm palm placed slowly and steadily with just enough weight to say, I am aware of you and I am here, that activates what psychologists refer to as a protective bonding response. Her nervous system interprets it as safety. Oxytocin begins to move, and emotionally, she begins to associate being near this person with a sense of calm she may not even be able to name. A woman who has spent years being her own source of strength, handling everything, depending on no one, feels something specific when a man places his hand there with quiet confidence. It is not about control. It is a form of communication that says you do not have to carry all of this alone right now. For a woman who has been her own foundation for a long time, that wordless gesture can hold more weight than an elaborate romantic evening. There is an account from a woman in her late 40s who described a moment when a man placed his hand on her back while they walked into a restaurant. She said that in that instant, she felt something she had not experienced in 15 years. She felt chosen. That is the depth of impact this touch carries when it is executed with genuine intention. The second touch is the two-handed hold. It is drastically underestimated. Ordinary hand-holding carries no particular power on its own. It is common enough to be unremarkable. What makes this different is the act of taking her hand and then bringing the second hand over to cradle it, so that both hands are wrapped around hers at once. This might happen mid-conversation, in a quiet moment between words, or right after she has shared something that required vulnerability to say. The reason this works reaches into neuroscience. When both hands are engaged in holding hers, it produces what is known as bilateral stimulation, a symmetrical sensory input that the brain reads as total attention and complete emotional presence. This is not incidental. Therapists use bilateral touch techniques in a clinical context, specifically in EMDR therapy, to help people move through emotional trauma. When both hands hold hers, her brain receives a signal that translates to, "You are safe here, and I am entirely with you." For a woman who has spent years sitting across from men who were physically present but mentally somewhere else entirely, at the table in body, while their mind drifted toward their phone or their obligations or their own interior world, this experience is quietly devastating in the best possible sense. It offers her something she may have quietly stopped believing was available to her: full, embodied, undivided attention. The contrast between what she has known and what she feels in this moment is precisely what makes it so powerful. Once a woman with real experience decides that someone is genuinely different, it becomes extraordinarily difficult for anyone else to compete with that. The third touch is the one that tends to catch women entirely off guard. It is the forehead connection. Not a kiss on the forehead, though something adjacent to that appears later, but the act of gently pressing your forehead against hers. Foreheads touching, eyes closing naturally, breath gradually synchronizing, the world narrowing down to just that. This may sound almost too intimate for something requiring no words, but the psychological significance of this gesture is enormous. Dr. Sue Johnson, the creator of emotionally focused therapy and one of the most referenced relationship researchers of the current era, has written extensively about what she calls bonding moments, micro-interactions that activate the attachment system in adults in the same way a mother's touch activates it in an infant. The forehead connection is among the most powerful of these bonding moments that two adults can share. The reason is vulnerability. This cannot happen at a distance. It requires closeness. It requires both people to slow down and lower their defenses simultaneously. For a woman who has spent years constructing emotional barriers high enough to filter out most of what the world has thrown at her, this touch is a quiet knock on a door she had forgotten was still there. It demands nothing. It does not push forward or escalate. It simply communicates, "I am here with you, completely, and nothing else exists right now." A man who can do this, who can hold the silence without rushing it, without deflecting the intimacy with humor, without turning it into something else, has just demonstrated more emotional depth than most people manage to show across the entire length of a relationship. The fourth touch is one that almost did not make this list, not because it is weak, but because of how remarkably effective it is. It is the nape of the neck touch. The back of the neck is one of the most physically sensitive and psychologically vulnerable areas on the human body. It is densely packed with nerve endings, and because it sits in a place a person cannot easily see or instinctively guard, contact there creates something unusual, a simultaneous spike in both arousal and trust. That combination is extraordinarily rare in the world of touch. Most physical contact produces one or the other. This produces both at once. When a hand is gently placed at the back of a woman's neck, perhaps while sitting beside her, perhaps while leaning in to say something, her brain moves through a rapid internal evaluation. Am I safe? Do I trust this person? Does this feel right? When the answer to all three is yes, the emotional response arrives almost immediately. Her breathing shifts. Her pupils dilate. Dopamine and oxytocin release together, which happens to be the precise neurochemical combination that underlies romantic attachment. A younger woman might not fully register the significance of what just happened, but a woman with more experience reads it immediately. She understands what that touch is communicating: confidence without aggression, desire without desperation, closeness without presumption. It is one of the most sophisticated things a man can convey through physical contact. One critical note: timing with this touch is not a suggestion. It is the entire foundation. This cannot be offered to someone you have just met. That is not connection. That is a violation of boundaries. This touch exists at the far end of established trust. It is earned, not assumed. And a woman with real experience will know the difference the moment it happens. The fifth touch is the one mentioned at the very beginning, the one that borders on unfair. It is the thumb stroke. While already holding her hand, or while a hand rests on her arm, her shoulder, or her knee, the thumb begins moving slowly back and forth across her skin. Small movements, steady rhythm, no announcement, no glance downward. Just the quiet, continuous motion while conversation continues as if nothing has changed. The science behind why this works is genuinely fascinating. There exists a specific class of nerve fibers called C-tactile afferents. These nerves are wired to respond exclusively to slow, gentle stroking contact, and they connect directly to the regions of the brain responsible for emotional bonding and social connection. Researchers at the University of Gothenburg in Sweden found that this particular type of touch activates the insular cortex, the brain region most associated with feelings of intimacy and closeness with another person. In straightforward terms, when the thumb moves slowly across her skin, it is directly activating the part of her brain that generates feelings of emotional closeness. And because the motion is so subtle, she may not consciously identify what is happening. But her brain registers every stroke. Her body responds to it completely. And emotionally, she begins to feel pulled toward this person in a way she may struggle to put into words. This is why it is almost unfair. A woman who has spent years in relationships where affection was either performative or entirely absent will feel that small, quiet, seemingly unconscious movement of a thumb and think to herself, he does not even realize he is doing it. This is simply who he is. And that thought, the belief that his tenderness is effortless rather than strategic, is what opens something in her that no grand gesture ever could. Not the expensive evenings, not the rehearsed words. The unconscious, gentle movement of a thumb during a completely ordinary conversation. That is what love actually feels like to a woman who has already seen everything else. The sixth touch is the silent pull. This is the moment when, without a word, without any verbal announcement, a hand reaches over and draws her closer. Maybe an arm settles across her shoulders and brings her in. Maybe a hand finds her waist and closes whatever space remained between them. No request, no invitation spoken aloud, just movement. This works on a principle that attachment researchers call proximity seeking. Within attachment theory, one of the primary markers of secure emotional bonding is the instinctive drive to reduce physical distance between two people. When she is pulled closer without being asked, it mirrors what a securely bonded partner does naturally, without thinking. It says through action alone, the space between us felt like too much, and I wanted you nearer. For a woman past her mid-30s or 40s, this carries a specific and profound weight. Many women at that stage of life have spent years operating under the belief that closeness had to be earned, that they had to be appealing enough, agreeable enough, giving enough to deserve someone's physical affection. They have been in relationships where physical closeness only materialized when the other person wanted something in return. So when a man draws her in simply because he wants her presence, not because something is being initiated, not because anyone is watching, it quietly rewrites a story she has been carrying for a very long time. It tells her she is wanted not for what she provides, not for what she does, but simply for being near him, simply for existing in the same space. If you have never witnessed a confident, self-sufficient, accomplished woman completely soften into the side of a man who wordlessly pulled her closer in the middle of an ordinary evening, you would be surprised by how total that transformation can be. And now the seventh touch, the one saved for last because its psychological weight exceeds everything else on this list combined. It is the long hold, a real embrace, not the brief obligatory squeeze, not the back-patting hug between acquaintances, not the half-committed one-armed gesture that communicates physical acknowledgement without genuine presence. A full, both arms, chest-to-chest embrace that holds for a minimum of 20 seconds. That number is not arbitrary. Research published in the journal Psychoneuroendocrinology found that hugs lasting 20 seconds or longer trigger a meaningful release of oxytocin while simultaneously lowering cortisol, the hormone most associated with stress. This means a long hug does not simply produce a feeling of being loved. It produces measurable biological change. Heart rate slows. Blood pressure drops. The nervous system transitions from sympathetic activation, the state of alertness and self-protection, into parasympathetic rest, which is the state in which emotional openness and genuine bonding become neurologically possible. This is precisely why relationship therapists prescribe extended physical holding to couples experiencing crisis. Dr. John Gottman, whose research on relationships spans more than 4 decades, has identified prolonged physical holding as one of the most effective tools available for rebuilding emotional trust between partners who have grown distant. This is not metaphor or comfort language. It is a clinically supported intervention with documented outcomes. For a woman who has moved through her 40s, her 50s, or beyond, this touch holds a meaning that younger experience cannot fully access. By that point in life, she has likely moved through loss, through heartbreak, through forms of loneliness she never spoke about publicly. She has learned to hold herself together with such practiced efficiency that the people around her often have no idea she is carrying anything at all. She became her own foundation because there was no other option. When someone wraps both arms around that woman and holds on, not for 2 polished seconds, but for a full, unhurried, genuine length of time, something in her shifts that she cannot manage by will alone. Every wall, every defense, every well-practiced instinct that tells her to stay composed and stay guarded, all of it softens. Not from weakness, but because for the first time in a very long time, she is not required to be strong. And that is the most powerful thing any touch can accomplish. Not excitement, not impression. Relief. The gift of permission to stop holding everything together, even briefly, even just for the length of an embrace. A man who can give her that will not simply be someone she falls for. He will be someone she chooses, clearly, repeatedly, with every part of herself she has spent years keeping out of reach from the wrong people. So now all 7 exist in one place. Each one rooted in psychology, supported by neuroscience, and confirmed by the lived experience of women who have known enough to understand what genuine connection actually feels like. And what makes every single one of them remarkable is that none require money, status, or extraordinary circumstances. They require awareness, they require intention, and they require the willingness to slow down long enough to actually be present with the person in front of you rather than moving through the motions of closeness. But understanding these touches only gets you halfway there. Because here is what most men miss entirely. A woman with real experience is not sitting passively waiting to be reached. She is sending her own signals, quiet, consistent, unmistakable signals that communicate exactly what she is feeling, if someone knows what to look for. Most men walk right past those signals and then wonder later why something that felt promising simply faded. If that has ever happened to you, share your story, because you are almost certainly not the only one.